This one hurt. It hurt real bad. Titanfall 2 is one of the greatest FPS games ever made. Created by essentially royalty in the FPS genre, it was beloved by all who played it, was a massive critical success, and solidified itself among other greats like MW2 and Halo 3. A certified classic. The problem is, right from the beginning of its marketing cycle, Titanfall 2 was set up and positioned to die. They knew it was going to underperform, but they did it anyway. I'm Captain Peach, welcome back to the pit, and today we're looking at the marketing assassination of Titanfall 2. Titanfall 1 was incredibly successful. It was a brand new IP by a newly created studio, Respawn Entertainment. Respawn was formed by Jason West and Vince Zampella, who made the critically acclaimed Medal of Honor Allied Assault, and then went on to create the Call of Duty franchise, including Call of Duty, Call of Duty 2, Modern Warfare, and Modern Warfare 2. Their team revolutionized first-person shooters and changed the genre forever. However, following a lot of shenanigans and legal battles, the pair were fired from Activision and Infinity Ward after MW2 and left to form Respawn, with the intent to create another massive franchise that would be published by EA. I'll go into more detail on this formation a little later on, because things get spicy. But their first game out of the gate, Titanfall 1, released to incredible sales. It sold a whopping 10 million copies, which is astounding for not only a new franchise from a new developer, but also for releasing as an Xbox console exclusive, at a time when the Xbox One had sold about 50% less than the PS4 and was still in its infancy. And while Titanfall had a pretty sharp player decline, it was still a huge hit, and Respawn was excited to improve upon it and create something bigger and better that would keep players coming back.
This is huge history happening, isn't it?
It's bigger than that, Chris. It's large.
The team quickly got to work on Titanfall 2 and would announce it in early April of 2016, with a short teaser confirming that it was releasing to all platforms and a worldwide reveal date at E3 in June. The teaser didn't show too much other than some slick graphics and the appearance of a sword-wielding Titan, something that wasn't in the previous game. While brief, this tease was enough to get fans super hyped to see what else was in store and what Respawn had been cooking up. We didn't have to wait long until the full reveal at E3 2016, showing off a pair of awesome trailers for the multiplayer and the single-player campaign, the announcement of some upcoming technical tests, and interviews with the team discussing the campaign, multiplayer, and everything the game has to offer. Titanfall 2 was looking amazing. It improved in every way upon the first game, it was opened up to more players than ever before, the graphics were gorgeous, and there were tons of fun new innovations in equipment, playstyles, and the Titans themselves. And of course, there was the introduction of the single-player campaign, something the first game was lacking. The technical test came out a couple of months later for 2 weekends in the following August, and players got to try a slice of the game for themselves, and it was everything they hoped it would be. The game was fast, innovative, and above all, it was super fun. These tests allowed Respawn to ensure server stability, fix some last-minute issues, and work on balancing for the game, making sure the full release was set up as best as possible for maximum player enjoyment. The marketing continued up until release with lots of social media posts, toys, and brand partnerships with several companies like Mountain Dew and Doritos. This is entirely irrelevant, but there was an interview at the time with the senior single-player designer, and the interviewer, when asking if the single-player was a core focus or was just tacked on, said, "I know that Modern Warfare 1 had a really good storyline as well as a really good campaign, but Modern Warfare 2 didn't have as great a campaign." What? Oh, this is why nobody trusts game journalists anymore. Anyway, back to what I was saying. We then got an incredible launch trailer that showcased the personal link between Pilot and Titan, prepping us for the emotional storyline in the campaign and the connection in multiplayer. It looked amazing, and finally, after such a long wait, the game would be in players' hands. Titanfall 2 released to terrific critical success. It scored an 89 on Metacritic, with the reviewers praising the innovative and emotional storytelling of the campaign and the fresh and fast-paced multiplayer that evolved the entire genre. The gunplay was pristine, the movement was fluid, and the Titans were all varied and tons of fun. There were all kinds of playstyles that you could choose, fun weapons and equipment, interesting game modes, and super well-designed maps. It also had incredible customization and loadout systems, and best of all, no loot boxes, no season pass, and all major DLC was free, which at the time was pretty much unheard of. Titanfall 2 funded its post-launch support through the sale of purely cosmetic skins for your Titans, weapons, and pilots, and you didn't need to buy any bullcrap coin bundles. You want something specific? Pay exactly how much it is.
With the glass ceiling broken, all the oppressed groups shall prosper, especially the most oppressed group of all, gamers.
It was a great system that benefited everybody. And don't get me started on the campaign. Fantastic levels, an engaging story, and bombastic set pieces. And what I consider to be one of the greatest campaign missions of all time, affecting cause. Up there with other Hall of Famers like All Gillied Up from Modern Warfare, incidentally designed by some of the same people. The mission featured the player having the ability to travel between two time periods instantaneously in the level, providing tons of interesting puzzles, combat, and gameplay. The campaign and the game as a whole was fresh, fun, innovative, and pushed the FPS genre forward in a way we hadn't seen in years. As I mentioned previously, it was a certified classic. The players absolutely loved it. At least the relatively small amount that actually bought it. By January 2017, just 3 months after release, Titanfall 2 sold only 4 million copies. Less than half the sales of the first one, and this one released to a much bigger console player base. And while 4 million copies isn't anything to scoff at in general, it's a very small amount for a blockbuster first-person shooter that is the sequel to a smash hit. For comparison, at the same time, Battlefield 1 was estimated to have sold 15 million copies in the exact same time frame. Titanfall 2 sales were far below expectations, which I'll get into a little bit later, and resulted in minimal buzz around the game. People just weren't talking about it. And the free DLC, which was tons of fun, didn't bring many new players in, and the game slowly started to die. Within less than a year, the post-launch support had ended as Respawn moved on to their next projects. This incredibly fun, innovative, and revolutionary first-person shooter came and went, and the gaming community at large has pretty much ignored it entirely. It failed. And nearly 10 years after release, at the time of this video, there hasn't been any continuation in the Titanfall franchise, aside from a few references in Respawn's next title, Apex Legends. So what went wrong? Why didn't any of the marketing work? Every single issue with the marketing all stems from EA putting the release date for Titanfall 2 exactly 1 week after the release of Battlefield 1, and exactly 1 week before the release of Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. Two massive juggernauts in the FPS genre, and the big game releases for the holiday season. And while Infinite Warfare had a fair share of controversy, primarily due to its reveal trailer, which I detail in a video I'll link at the end, it was still Call of Duty, meaning it always sells a boatload, and even when it underperforms, it's still one of the highest selling games of the year. But Battlefield 1 was the real issue. Its reveal trailer broke the record at the time for the most liked game trailer of all time. Battlefield 1 was a huge cultural phenomenon and would go on to be a massive success with over 25 million players. So not only was Titanfall 2 smack dab between the incredible popular Call of Duty franchise, but also the release of what would become the best-selling Battlefield ever made. But this was purely intentional, because Titanfall and Battlefield were being released by the same publisher, EA. Which means that all major marketing goes through EA. And this is where the primary issue with Titanfall 2's marketing came from. Because Battlefield 1 was such a phenomenon, they wanted to push that game as hard as they could to make it a massive success. So aside from the small teaser trailer for Titanfall, every other piece of marketing would be overshadowed by Battlefield 1. The worldwide reveal event for Titanfall 2 that showed off single and multiplayer trailers? The whole part of the conference was 5 minutes total, and right before it, EA CEO teased the upcoming 10-minute Battlefield 1 gameplay reveal that would be shown after. While Titanfall 2 got a 15-minute GameSpot interview with Vince Zampella talking about the campaign, Battlefield 1 got a huge hour-long event for a live multiplayer match with celebrities and influencers. While Titanfall 2 had a couple of pre-alpha technical tests in August, Battlefield 1 had an open beta at the end of the same month. Tell me, which sounds more enticing to you? A pre-alpha technical test to check server stability? Or an open beta where you could play what Snoop Dogg and Terry Crews got to play?
We got a special weapon that I ain't gonna tell you about, but we got a couple of little things that we gonna rock and roll with.
Zac Efron. It's a little cloudy.
We got a special weapon.
While Titanfall had a special Mountain Dew skin, Battlefield 1 got an Xbox console bundle. The excellent launch trailer for Titanfall 2 came out 3 days after the release of Battlefield 1. I'm sure everybody was talking about it. EA made sure that Titanfall's marketing took a backseat to Battlefield every single time. To add on to it, nearly all of the media coverage was divided between Infinite Warfare and Battlefield 1, the two real titans going at it during the holiday season. With countless articles, YouTubers, influencers at large, picking apart every piece of marketing, every offhand word spoken by a developer, and anything that they could use to drive clicks. Both franchises had rabid fan bases that showed immense loyalty and wanted to prove that their game was the better one. So online conversation was dominated by one of the two. And because this kind of hype tends to snowball, discussion around the games grew exponentially as more people talked about it and told other people. And the super unfortunate result of this was that any mention of Titanfall pretty much got relegated to, oh yeah, that's coming out too. It got left behind by the online sphere. And as I mentioned, EA put it behind Battlefield 1 in all of their marketing. Should have been called Battlefield first, am I right, fellas? Battlefield was EA's flagship FPS franchise. They owned it fully and had complete control over it. For Titanfall, on the other hand, EA only had publishing rights. They didn't own it. So naturally, EA's loyalty and effort is going to be pushed more towards their own franchises. But even with a partnership, EA still makes lots of money if Titanfall does well. Why would EA sacrifice Titanfall like this by purposely positioning it behind Battlefield in all their marketing and release it a week later?
Straight. Stay tuned.
Respawn's game producer Drew McCoy said about the release date, "I actually don't know where the decision came from. I just know it was locked in a long time ago and there was no changing it." Yeah, I wonder where it came from. EA's CEO Andrew Wilson, in an earnings call months prior to the launch of Battlefield and Titanfall, was asked about putting the release dates so close together. He stated, "Shooters are a giant category in our industry, 4.5 billion. There's a very broad and diverse set of players who are looking to fulfill different gameplay motivations. Some people play very quick play, I don't think grammar's his strong suit. Some people play more strategic, some people want both in different context." CFO Blake Jorgensen added, "Titanfall 2 has evolved substantially from the first Titanfall. It will be on both platforms, which obviously means a bigger audience for Titanfall. We think you're going to see numbers clearly larger than the first Titanfall." So essentially, they didn't think it would affect either game because they appeal to different styles of players. Battlefield being a little more strategic, and Titanfall being fast-paced and high energy. But what both of these gentlemen failed to mention is that according to their logic, Titanfall was directly competing with Call of Duty, the franchise that also caters to people that play very quick play. And most gamers aren't going to be picking up 3 competing first-person shooters in the span of 3 weeks. If not for financial reasons, then their valuable time or their limited range that they can direct their interests. It's hard to get super hyped about 3 games in the exact same genre coming out at the exact same time. Players would have to make some tough choices. And for the Christmas season, parents and loved ones probably aren't going to pick up 3 separate games for your cousin Greg. EA's statements were ridiculous. But here are my 2 theories for why they did this. The first one is that EA saw blood in the water. After a disastrous reveal of Infinite Warfare, which became the most hated trailer of all time, EA saw an opportunity to take down their toughest competitor and establish their own franchise as the dominant shooter. Now, Battlefield 1 was proving to be pretty unstoppable in the public eye. The hype for that game was insane. But as Chief Email Officer Andy mentioned, there's a bit of a difference in style of gameplay compared to a more faster-paced game like Call of Duty. So how do you make sure players that are looking for a quicker experience don't buy Infinite Warfare? You take another established franchise that also uses wall running, has advanced tech and weaponry, is set in the future, and you sell it at the same time. In this theory, the purpose isn't for Battlefield 1 to cannibalize Titanfall 2 sales, the purpose is for Call of Duty and Titanfall to cannibalize each other. Basically, sacrificing Titanfall to make Battlefield the #1 seller. The second theory is that EA purposely hurt Titanfall 2 for a takeover of Respawn. To make a little more sense of this, let me take you back to the original formation of the partnership. When Jason West and Vince Zampella left Activision to form their own independent studio, a core part of the reason they didn't want to be owned by a publisher was so they would have complete control of their franchises. At the time, Zampella told the LA Times, "We have learned the hard way that the best way to ensure the integrity and quality of your work and make sure the fans get what they deserve is to own the intellectual property, something they didn't have with Call of Duty." Now, to fund a fully independent studio requires a lot of investment. So in order to obtain that investment, Respawn teamed up with EA through their Partners program. EA Games label president Frank Gibeau said, "This is the start of a great publishing partnership, one that I expect will develop blockbuster game franchises. At EA, we're honored to be their partners and to give them the support they need to hire a team and return to making incredible games." In addition to handling future publishing duties, EA funded the new developer with several $1 million of seed capital. And as the LA Times reported, that's unusual for a developer that's retaining the intellectual property rights to its games. The pair's agent told the Times, "What makes Vince and Jason's deal so groundbreaking is that EA is investing in them as individuals, not as part of a larger established company." Okay, so at the creation of Respawn Entertainment, their primary goal was to have full ownership of their games. And EA provided the initial funding, the seed capital, used to start the studio. Investors who provide seed money take on high risk because the business is unproven, but they invest in exchange for equity, or ownership, hoping the company will grow significantly and provide a strong return on investment. If the business succeeds and or raises more funding, their early stake could become highly valuable. And I'm sure EA saw the value that Respawn had and wanted in. Now here's where it gets spicy. I'll give you a quick business lesson without getting too technical. The value of a private company can be measured in a multitude of different ways. It can be how much revenue they bring in, their earning potential, their assets, their brand strength, etc. Essentially, overall value is determined by how well the company is doing and the value of everything they have. And because Titanfall 2 sold about half of what the first one did and less than half of expectations in a wider market, that means that the brand is not as powerful as it appears, the franchise isn't very strong, and Respawn would have a lot less revenue than was anticipated. This would most likely cause the value of Respawn to drop quite a bit, because it's clearly not an unstoppable powerhouse company. And games are incredibly expensive to make. So if a game comes way below expectations and what's needed to fund game development, it can put the company itself at risk, requiring them to get more funding, investment, or to sell. As I mentioned earlier, EA was a seed investor. They funded the whole thing right from the beginning, which means they would have gotten a good portion of Respawn right from the start. And without getting too much into the weeds here, many seed investors also get special preferences and deals over later investors that they can leverage to negotiate or take control if the business struggles. To put it simply, EA funds Respawn, Respawn spends big money to build a game that severely underperforms, this lowers their value and potentially puts them in a tough financial spot, meaning to continue they would require funding or would need to be bought. Investors like EA that have a large stake in the company have a lot of influence to push for sale. And if a company like Respawn doesn't have the money to fully continue operations, they don't have a ton of choice. Now here's why I think this was the likely scenario that happened. Remember how the founders of Respawn started their own studio so they could have control over their franchises? Well, just a year after the launch of Titanfall 2, it was announced that EA bought Respawn for $455 million, giving EA full ownership of their talent, technology, and franchises. The Respawn CEO Vince Zampella said the move brings the resources and support his company needs for its long-term success. We're excited to combine our strengths. A little bit different than the song that was sung when the studio was first formed, and a complete reversal of the historic, groundbreaking first deal. Whether it was to buy Respawn, take Call of Duty down a peg, or a combination of both, it appears, allegedly, that EA had planned out a full assassination of Titanfall 2 for their own personal gain. They minimized all of its marketing efforts and timed all of its big reveals and events to be placed in the shadows of Battlefield 1, put the game on the back burner entirely, and set up its release date between two insanely strong competitors so it would never stand a chance. Because of that, so many people missed out on an amazing game, it didn't get much long-term post-launch support, and it affected the entire franchise going forward. And the sad thing is, I think if they released Titanfall 2 just 5 to 6 months after Battlefield and Call of Duty, it would have been a massive hit. By then, players would have gotten bored of those other two games, especially with Battlefield taking 6 months just to release its first major DLC. The space would have been empty and gamers would be wanting a fresh shooter. That also would have been the same time frame that the first Titanfall released in, and that game sold incredibly well with a much smaller console market. But then, would EA own Respawn in the Titanfall franchise right now? Unfortunately, the ones who got hurt the most were the developers that put their heart and soul into an amazing game that was put on the chopping block for corporate greed, and the players who had one of the best shooters in years get its life cut short and the franchise laid to rest for a very long time. But at the very least, management at Respawn learned what needed to be done to make their next game uber successful, and that was cutting out EA almost entirely from the marketing process. That'll have to be for a future video though. After all that, there's still a dedicated player base for Titanfall 2, keeping it alive nearly 10 years later through a lot of server and hacker issues and near complete abandonment by EA. People have a lot of love for the game and the franchise as a whole, and are begging for a continuation. Lately though, there have been reports of a future installment in the Titanfall franchise and teased collaborations with Helldivers, but still nothing yet on an announcement of a third Titanfall game. And even though EA owns the franchise now and has a higher stake in its success, I feel like they'd still screw it up anyway.
Trust me.
But hey, that's marketing. Thanks so much to everyone that suggested the video in the comments and voted in the poll. If you enjoyed the video, stand by for Titanfall on the like button, shoot the subscribe with the smart pistol, and if you want to watch a breakdown of how Infinite Warfare's reveal trailer nearly killed Call of Duty, or a video YouTube thinks you'd absolutely love, click on one of the videos on screen. And until next time, stay peachy.